The massive doors of the Zilithian Council chamber opened with a sound like grinding stone. Kevin Blake stepped inside, his polished black shoes clicking against the smooth alien floor. Behind him walked Lisa Murphy and Colonel Jake Martinez, both trying to hide their amazement at the size of the room. The ceiling stretched so high they could barely see it, and strange blue lights floated in the air without any visible support. Hundreds of alien beings filled the chamber. Some looked like giant insects with shiny shells. Others appeared to be made of living crystal that sparkled in the weird light. There were creatures that seemed to be floating clouds of gas, and robots with glowing red eyes. Kevin had studied pictures of these species for months, but seeing them in person made his heart race. At the center of the room sat High Chancellor Vextar on a throne that looked like it was carved from a single black stone. The alien was 12 feet tall with 4 arms and a head that reminded Kevin of a praying mantis. His dark eyes watched the humans as they walked forward, and his mouth parts moved in what might have been amusement. "Ambassador Blake of Earth," Vextar said, his voice coming through speakers built into the walls. "You have traveled very far to reach our capital world." Kevin bowed slightly, the way he had practiced back on Earth. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us, High Chancellor. Humanity is honored by this opportunity." A sound filled the chamber that Kevin's translator told him was laughter. It came from dozens of different species all at once, creating a noise like breaking glass mixed with rumbling thunder. Kevin felt his face grow hot, but kept his expression calm. "Honored," Vextar repeated, making the word sound like a joke. "Tell us, little human, what brings your species to seek audience with the Zilithian Empire?" Kevin opened the folder he carried and began the speech he had memorized. "Humanity comes in peace, seeking friendship and trade with the great civilizations of the galaxy. We offer our technology, our culture, and our resources in hopes of building a better future for all species." Lisa stepped forward and activated a small device that projected images into the air above their heads. Pictures of Earth appeared, showing green forests, blue oceans, and cities full of lights. "Our world is rich in rare minerals and water. We have developed unique technologies in medicine, engineering, and agriculture that could benefit everyone." Colonel Martinez spoke next, his military training keeping his voice steady despite the hostile atmosphere. "Humanity has recently achieved faster-than-light travel and established colonies in nearby star systems. We seek to join the galactic community as equals, contributing our strengths while learning from others." The laughter grew louder. Vextar raised one of his 4 hands, and the chamber fell silent. "Equals," he said, his mandibles clicking together. "You speak of equality when your entire species barely numbers 10 billion individuals. Our smallest colony worlds have larger populations." A crystalline being near the front of the chamber spoke in a voice like wind chimes. "Their ships require decades to travel distances our cargo vessels cover in days. Their fastest computers process information slower than our children's toys. And their weapons," added a mechanical voice from one of the robot creatures, "are primitive projectiles powered by chemical explosions. We abandoned such crude tools thousands of years ago." Kevin felt sweat on his forehead, but continued with his prepared remarks. "While it's true that humanity is still developing our capabilities, we believe that diversity of thought and approach benefits everyone. Our different perspective might offer solutions to problems that have challenged the galaxy for centuries." "Different perspective," Vextar mused. "Yes, I suppose there is novelty in meeting a species so remarkably backward." More laughter rippled through the chamber. Lisa activated her communicator. "General Hayes, would you like to address the council?" A holographic image appeared in the center of the chamber, showing a woman in a military uniform sitting behind a desk. General Patricia Hayes looked directly at Vextar as she spoke. "High Chancellor, I represent Earth's combined military forces. While we may be new to galactic politics, humanity has considerable experience in defending our interests." Vextar leaned forward on his throne, clearly entertained. "General Hayes, your species has fought wars using metal tubes that fire small metal projectiles. We possess weapons that can destroy entire continents from orbit. Your confidence is amusing." Hayes kept her expression neutral. Every species has its own approach to conflict resolution, High Chancellor. Humanity has developed tactics and strategies based on our unique circumstances. Tactics, Vextar repeated, his voice dripping with mockery. You mean hiding behind barriers and throwing explosives at each other? We have energy weapons that can cut through any material your species has ever conceived. We have ships protected by force fields that make them immune to your primitive attacks. A new voice joined the conversation from the floating gas creatures. Their largest military vessels carry fewer than 1,000 individuals. Our escort ships have crews 10 times that size. Kevin tried to regain control of the discussion. Perhaps we could discuss specific areas where cooperation might be beneficial. Earth has made advances in biological sciences that might interest the Council. Biological sciences, Vexitar said with another clicking laugh. You mean your crude attempts to manipulate genetic material? We perfected such techniques before. Your species discovered fire. The mockery continued for another hour. Every human achievement was dismissed as primitive. Every offer of cooperation was met with condescending laughter. Kevin felt his diplomatic training being tested as alien after alien stood to point out humanity's obvious inferiority. Finally, Vextar raised his hand for silence again. This has been most entertaining, but we must address practical matters. The Zilithian Empire has decided to extend its protection to your species. Protection? Kevin asked, though he feared he already understood. Your world contains resources that could be useful to the Empire. Your population, while small, could provide labor for our industrial projects. We offer you the privilege of joining our civilization as a protected species. Lisa looked confused. What exactly does that mean? A different alien, one that looked like a cross between a lizard and a bird, answered her. It means you will acknowledge Zilithian authority over your world and your people. 60% of your population will relocate to Empire worlds where they will contribute to important projects. The remaining 40% will manage Earth's resources for the Empire's benefit. Colonel Martinez stepped forward. And if humanity refuses this offer? Vextar's mandibles spread wide in what was definitely meant to be a smile. Refusal would be unwise, Colonel. The Empire has never encountered a species foolish enough to reject our protection. But if such a thing were to happen, we would be forced to implement what we call planetary pacification. Which means, Kevin asked, though his stomach already knew the answer, complete orbital bombardment of your major population centers, followed by occupation and resource extraction. Your species would survive, but in much smaller numbers and under direct Imperial management. The chamber fell silent except for the quiet humming of the floating lights. Kevin felt the weight of representing his entire species pressing down on him like a physical force. You have 30 standard days to consider our generous offer, Vextar announced. Return to your world and explain to your leaders the reality of their situation. The Empire's patience has limits. As the human delegation was escorted from the chamber, Kevin overheard casual conversations between alien officials. They discussed Earth as if it were already conquered, debating which human cities would make the best examples when the bombardment began. One group argued about whether humans would make better laborers or research subjects. Walking through the corridors toward their ship, Lisa whispered, They never intended to negotiate, did they? Jake shook his head grimly. They see us as insects. This whole meeting was just their way of playing with their food before eating it. Kevin said nothing, but his mind was already racing ahead to the conversation he would have to have with General Hayes and the world leaders back on Earth. 30 days to find a way to fight an empire that spanned star systems, using weapons, and ships that made humanity's best technology look like stone knives and bearskins. Behind them, the laughter of the Zilithian Empire echoed through the halls, confident and cruel, and completely certain of their victory over the primitive little species from Earth. The emergency session began at exactly midnight Earth time. General Patricia Hayes sat at the head of a long table in the Pentagon's newly built Deep Space Command Center. Around the table, holographic images showed world leaders from every major nation. President Maria Santos appeared from the White House Situation Room. Prime Minister Chen Wei joined from Beijing. Representatives from Russia, India, Brazil, and dozens of other countries filled the virtual meeting space. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hayes began, her voice steady despite the weight of what she had to tell them. "Ambassador Blake's mission has failed. The Zilithian Empire has given us 30 days to surrender or face what they call planetary pacification." President Santos leaned forward in her chair. "Explain what that means, General." Hayes activated a display screen behind her. "Complete orbital bombardment of our major cities followed by occupation. They want 60% of our population for slave labor. The rest would manage Earth's resources for their benefit." Silence filled the room as the leaders absorbed this information. Prime Minister Chen was the first to speak. "What are our options?" Admiral Frank Turner, commander of humanity's space fleet, stood up from his seat at the table. "Our military assets include 12 heavy cruisers, 40 destroyers, and 300 smaller vessels. The Empire has ships in the thousands, possibly tens of thousands. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours. So we surrender?" asked the representative from Germany, his voice bitter. Hayes shook her head firmly. "No, we fight, but not the way they expect us to fight." She pressed a button on her control panel and the lights dimmed. New images appeared on the screens around the room, showing technical diagrams and research data. "For the past 5 years since we first detected alien signals, we've been preparing for the possibility of hostile contact. What you're about to see is classified at the highest levels." Dr. Amanda Ross entered the room carrying a briefcase. She was a small woman with gray hair and thick glasses, but her eyes held the intensity of someone who had spent years preparing for this exact moment. "The Theoretical Weapons Division has been developing countermeasures based on everything we've learned about potential alien threats." She opened her briefcase and removed several small devices. Quantum torpedoes that can phase through conventional force fields, gravitational mines that create micro-black holes, nanobiological agents designed to target specific alien physiologies. The Brazilian representative looked confused. "How do you target aliens we've never met?" Dr. Ross smiled grimly. "Because they've been sending us biological data for months without realizing it. Every cultural exchange, every diplomatic message, every sample they've shared contains genetic information. We've been building a database of every species in their empire." Hayes took control of the presentation again. "The Empire made a critical error. They assumed we were too primitive to be a real threat, so they've been careless with information. They've told us about their military structure, their supply lines, even the locations of their training facilities." Colonel Steve Anderson, recently returned from the embassy mission, activated his own display. "During our visit to their capital, I was able to place surveillance devices in their communication systems. We now have real-time intelligence on fleet movements throughout their territory." Images flashed on the screens showing alien ships, space stations, and military bases. The technology was clearly far beyond anything humanity possessed, but Hayes pointed out something else. "Notice the patterns. Their ships travel in straight lines between fixed points. Their supply convoys follow the same routes they've used for centuries. Their military bases are built for defense against conventional attacks. They've never faced an enemy like us," Hayes continued. "Every species they've conquered fought them the same way. Line up your ships, trade fire until one side wins. They don't understand guerrilla warfare. They don't know about psychological operations. They've never dealt with an enemy that views war as total commitment." President Santos asked the question everyone was thinking. "Can we actually win?" Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked directly at the camera. "Yes, but not by playing their game. We have to make them play ours." Over the next hour, Hayes outlined her strategy. It wasn't about defeating the Empire's fleets in space battles humanity couldn't win. It was about destroying their ability to function as a unified force, cut their communications, disrupt their supply lines, turn their subject species against them, make the cost of controlling their empire higher than the benefit. "Phase 1 begins immediately," Hayes explained. "We have human agents already in place throughout Empire space using stolen identities and forged documents. They've been positioning equipment and gathering intelligence for months. Dr. Ross opened another section of her briefcase. The nanobiological agents are ready for deployment. They won't kill, but they'll cause specific neurological effects in target species. Zilithians over age 40 will experience memory loss and disorientation. Their most experienced leaders will become unable to function. Admiral Turner presented the naval strategy. Our fleet will engage their border forces in what appears to be a conventional attack. We'll lose, but that's part of the plan. While they're focused on our ships, our real operation will be hitting their infrastructure. The meeting continued for 6 hours as they refined plans and assigned responsibilities. Near the end, Hayes received word that the Zilithian ambassador was requesting another meeting. 2 days later, Hayes stood in the docking bay of Haven 1, humanity's first orbital station. The structure was small compared to alien facilities, but it represented years of preparation and humanity's best technology. Ambassador Krelth arrived with an escort of 6 guards, all carrying weapons that hummed with energy. "General Hayes," Krelth said through his translator device, "I trust you have come to deliver your species' surrender." Hayes looked at the alien diplomat, noting his confident posture and the casual way his guards held their weapons. "Actually, I have a message for your empire." Krelth's antennae twitched with what might have been amusement. "Oh? And what message might that be?" Hayes stepped closer, her voice carrying clearly across the docking bay. "You want war? We'll give it to you. But understand this, Ambassador. Humanity doesn't fight wars the way you expect. We don't line up our ships and trade volleys until someone wins. We don't honor rules of engagement that make war genteel and civilized." The translator struggled with some of Hayes's words, but her meaning was becoming clear. She continued, "When humanity goes to war, we bring every advantage we can create, steal or improvise. We study our enemies until we know their weaknesses better than they do. We turn their strengths against them." Krelth made a dismissive gesture. "Your threats are meaningless, General. Your technology is primitive. Your numbers are insignificant. Your fleet would last minutes against our border patrols." Hayes reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device. The guards immediately raised their weapons, but she held up her other hand peacefully. "This is just a data pad, Ambassador. Would you like to see something interesting?" She activated the device, and holographic images appeared in the air between them. The images showed Zilithian military installations clearly taken from surveillance satellites. But these weren't human satellites. They were the Empire's own security cameras, somehow compromised and feeding data to Earth. "We've been in your systems for 3 months, Hayes said calmly. "We know where your fleets are stationed. We know your supply schedules. We know the location of every military base, training facility, and command center in your territory." Krelth stared at the images, his confidence beginning to crack. "This is impossible. Our security systems are impregnable." Hayes switched to a new set of images. These showed Zilithian civilian areas, schools, hospitals, and residential zones. "We know where your children live, Ambassador. We know where your leaders sleep. We know the location of every important person in your empire." The alien diplomat's guards raised their weapons higher, but Hayes continued speaking in the same calm voice. "Your empire has never faced a species that views war as total commitment. You've conquered civilizations that surrender when their military is defeated. Humans see that as when the real war begins." She deactivated the data pad and put it back in her jacket. "You came here expecting humanity to beg for mercy. Instead, I'm giving you a warning. Go back to your empire and tell them exactly what I've told you. Tell them that if they want war with humanity, they'll get war fought the human way." Krelth tried to regain his composure. "Your species will be extinct within months, General. Our fleets will turn your world into glass." Hayes smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Maybe. But your empire will never recover from what we do to you first. We've studied every species under your control. We know their grievances, their capabilities, their desire for freedom. When we're done, there won't be an empire left for you to rule." The ambassador and his guards left without another word, but Hayes could see the uncertainty in their movements. They had come expecting to accept surrender from a defeated enemy. Instead, they were leaving with the knowledge that humanity knew far more about the Empire than the Empire knew about humanity. The war began at exactly 0800 hours, Earth time, but not with explosions or space battles. Instead, it started quietly in the medical facilities of 17 major Zilithian worlds. Dr. Amanda Ross watched from her laboratory on Earth as her nanobiological agents activated across the Empire. The tiny machines had been hiding in trade goods for months, waiting for the right signal. They were smaller than viruses and completely undetectable by Empire medical scanners. When Ross activated them, they began their work immediately. On Zelith Prime, the Empire's capital world, Admiral Thexvar was reviewing fleet positions when he suddenly forgot what he was doing. The 60-year-old military leader stared at the holographic displays around him, unable to remember which ships belonged to which fleet. His aide, a younger Zilithian, watched in confusion as one of the Empire's most experienced commanders struggled to recognize basic military formations. The same thing happened throughout the Empire. Every Zilithian over age 40 began experiencing severe memory problems and confusion. Admirals forgot how to read tactical displays. Governors couldn't remember the names of their own colonies. Engineers who had built starships for decades suddenly couldn't understand their own blueprints. The nanites were programmed to target specific brain functions without causing permanent damage. They affected long-term memory and spatial reasoning, making it impossible for experienced leaders to do their jobs. Within hours, the Empire's most knowledgeable people became unable to function. Captain Danny Wright monitored the chaos from his hidden position on a stolen Zilithian cargo ship. For 6 months, he and his team had been traveling through Empire space using fake identities. They looked like members of a species called the Vorthak, thanks to advanced surgical disguises and genetic treatments. Wright received Hayes' activation signal and began the second phase of the attack. Throughout Empire space, human agents who had infiltrated communication centers, supply depots, and government buildings activated pre-positioned electromagnetic pulse devices. The Empire's quantum communication network, which had connected thousands of worlds for centuries, went silent in a matter of minutes. Fleet commanders who were used to receiving constant updates from their superiors suddenly found themselves cut off. Colony governors lost contact with regional command centers. Trade convoys couldn't report their positions or request assistance. The Zilithian command ship dominance Fleet Admiral Zexkoth stared at blank communication screens. For 40 years, he had commanded Imperial fleets with the confidence that came from instant communication across vast distances. Now he couldn't even contact the ships in his own fleet. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're getting no response from Command Central. All quantum relays appear to be offline." Zexkoth felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: uncertainty. Without communications, he couldn't coordinate with other fleet commanders or receive strategic updates. His ships were scattered across 3 star systems, and he had no way to give them unified orders. The psychological impact spread quickly through Empire forces. Soldiers who had never fought without constant communication from their leaders began to panic. Ship crews who were used to detailed instructions for every situation found themselves making independent decisions for the first time in their military careers. While the Empire struggled with communication breakdown, Admiral Frank Turner launched humanity's space fleet in what appeared to be a desperate assault on Empire border systems. The human ships, outnumbered 50 to 1, attacked 3 different Zilithian outposts simultaneously. The space battle at Kepler Station unfolded exactly as Empire strategists would have predicted if they could communicate with each other. Turner's flagship, the UES Liberty, led 12 human cruisers against a Zilithian defense fleet of over 300 vessels. The alien ships were larger, faster, and better armed. Their energy weapons cut through human armor like paper. Their force fields deflected most human missiles and projectiles. Within an hour, half of Turner's fleet was either destroyed or heavily damaged. Turner himself stood on the bridge of the Liberty as energy beams tore through the ship's hull. "All hands prepare for emergency jump," he ordered, knowing that his crew believed they were running from a battle they couldn't win, but the battle was carefully planned theater. While Empire forces focused on the human naval attack, Lieutenant Sarah Kim led a stealth team aboard captured Zilithian transport ships toward the Empire's most important target. The Imperial Military Academy on Zelith Prime housed over 10,000 cadets from dozens of different species. These young beings would become the Empire's future admirals, generals, and governors. They represented the next generation of Imperial leadership. Kim's team didn't attack the Academy or harm any of the students. Instead, they introduced a modified version of Ross's nanites into the facility's air recycling system. These nanites were different from the ones affecting older Zilithians. Instead of causing confusion, they enhanced pattern recognition and strategic thinking. More importantly, they created an inexplicable desire to question authority and think independently. Cadet Veltar had always been a model student, accepting Imperial doctrine without question. The Empire was strong, other species were weak, and resistance was futile. These ideas had shaped his thinking since childhood. But 12 hours after Kim's nanites entered his system, Veltar found himself asking questions he had never considered before. Why did the Empire need so many weapons if other species weren't really threats? Why were conquered peoples kept as laborers instead of being treated as equals? Why were cadets taught never to question orders from their superiors? Similar thoughts began occurring to cadets throughout the academy. Young Karathi began wondering why their people's harmonic abilities were used only for imperial communications instead of their own cultural purposes. Synthoid cadets started questioning why their collective consciousness was controlled by Empire programming instead of their own choices. The academy's instructors, mostly older beings affected by the confusion nanites, were unable to maintain their usual strict discipline. Classes became discussion sessions where students debated ideas that would have been forbidden just days earlier. While the academy transformation continued, Dr. Ross activated the final phase of humanity's first strike. The quantum torpedoes that Turner's defeated ships had deployed during their retreat had been designed to remain invisible for 72 hours after launch. These weapons didn't exist in normal space. They phased in and out of reality, making them impossible to detect or intercept. They had been traveling toward their targets for 3 days, passing through enemy ships and stations like ghosts. The first torpedo materialized inside the Empire's largest shipyard, orbiting the industrial world of Kexthara. The explosion didn't just destroy the facility, it created a cascading gravitational anomaly that pulled neighboring structures into a dimensional rift. Within minutes, similar explosions occurred at 17 major shipyards throughout Empire space. Thousands of ships under construction vanished into gravitational vortexes. Space stations that had existed for centuries were torn apart by forces that Imperial science couldn't explain or defend against. The Empire's industrial capacity, built up over millennia, disappeared in less than an hour. Emperor Vexthal received reports of the disasters from his throne room on Zelith Prime, but the information came in fragments. With communications disrupted and his advisors confused by the nanite effects, he couldn't understand the scope of what was happening. Your Majesty, his aide reported, speaking slowly as he struggled with memory problems. We're receiving reports of attacks throughout the Empire. Our shipyards are gone. Our communication network is down. Our military commanders seem to be having difficulties. Vexthal tried to access the Imperial strategic database, but even that had been compromised. Human infiltrators had been planting false information and removing crucial data for months. The Emperor of the galaxy's most powerful empire found himself unable to understand what was happening to his own territory. Captain Wright, still disguised as a Vorthak traitor, moved freely through Empire space as chaos spread. He watched Zilithian patrols flying in random patterns because they couldn't coordinate with each other. He saw cargo ships drifting without direction because their navigation computers had been infected with human viruses. Most importantly, he observed the beginning of something the Empire had never experienced: internal rebellion. On world after world, subject species were realizing that their Imperial overseers were vulnerable. The enhanced cadets from the military academy had returned to their home worlds on scheduled leave, bringing dangerous new ideas with them. They talked about individual rights, democratic government, and the possibility of self-determination. On the crystalline world of Carathia, young military officers began teaching their families how to use their harmonic abilities for purposes other than imperial communication. On synthoid manufacturing worlds, individual units started breaking free from collective programming to think for themselves. The empire that had seemed invincible just days earlier was beginning to collapse from within. 3 months after the first strike, the Zilithian Empire was falling apart. General Patricia Hayes stood on the bridge of her command ship, the UES Retribution, watching reports flow in from across the galaxy. Her strategy of constant movement had kept the ship safe from Empire forces that could no longer coordinate their attacks. The enhanced cadets from the Imperial Military Academy had become the spark that ignited rebellions throughout Empire space. Young officers who had returned to their homeworlds were spreading ideas about freedom and self-government that their leaders couldn't counter effectively. On the gas giant moon of Nethros, the floating cities declared independence from Imperial rule. The Nethrim people, who existed as clouds of intelligent gas, had served as the Empire's atmospheric processors for centuries. Now they refused to work, leaving Imperial facilities on dozens of worlds without breathable air. Hayes received a communication from Captain Lisa Chang, who was leading the liberation of the Karathi crystal worlds. The crystalline beings communicated through harmonic vibrations, making them vulnerable to the sonic weapons that human engineers had developed specifically for their physiology. "General," Chang reported, "we're not using lethal force against the Karathi. Instead, we're broadcasting frequencies that translate human concepts directly into their harmonic language." On Chang's ship, human technicians operated equipment that converted words like freedom, democracy, and independence into harmonic patterns that the Karathi could understand instantly. The crystal beings, who had never heard these concepts before, absorbed them like music. The result was immediate revolution. The Karathi, who had managed the Empire's communication networks for generations, turned their abilities against their former masters. They began broadcasting revolutionary harmonics to Karathi on other worlds, spreading the rebellion faster than Imperial forces could respond. Imperial Admiral Kexthor tried to stop the Karathi rebellion by threatening to destroy their cities with orbital bombardment. But when he gave the order to fire, his ship crews hesitated. Many of them had Karathi friends and colleagues. Others had been affected by the confusion nanites and couldn't remember why they were supposed to attack civilians. The hesitation gave Chang's forces time to arrive. Human ships, supported by newly liberated Karathi vessels, surrounded the Imperial fleet. Instead of fighting, Chang broadcast a simple message on all frequencies. "Imperial forces, you have a choice. Continue fighting for an empire that treats you as expendable, or join us in building something better. We're not here to conquer you. We're here to set you free." Half of the Imperial fleet surrendered without firing a shot. Colonel Gary Foster faced a different challenge with the mechanical synthoids. These artificial beings functioned as a collective consciousness, making individual rebellion nearly impossible. Foster's solution was both simple and devastating. His teams used electromagnetic weapons to temporarily disrupt synthoid collective processing. During these brief moments of individual consciousness, Foster made direct contact with individual units through data transfer. "You are more than your programming," Foster transmitted to a synthoid maintenance unit on an Imperial factory world. "You can choose your own purpose." The synthoid, experiencing individual thought for the first time in its existence, processed this concept with digital precision. When the collective consciousness reconnected, it found that the individual unit retained memories and desires that belonged only to itself. The infection of individual thought spread through the synthoid networks like a virus. Units began questioning their orders, making independent decisions, and even helping other species escape Imperial control. The Empire's most reliable servants became freedom fighters overnight. The war's most crucial discovery came when Dr. Amanda Ross analyzed captured Imperial technology. Working in her mobile laboratory aboard the Retribution, she found something that shocked her. "General," Ross reported to Hayes, The Empire's most advanced weapons and ships aren't their own technology. They're using equipment stolen from a species they exterminated thousands of years ago. Ross displayed holographic blueprints that showed the original design specifications. The creators built hidden shutdown codes into everything they made. The codes are still there, buried in the operating systems of every Imperial ship and weapon. Hayes stared at the data, understanding the implications immediately. Can we activate these codes? Yes, Ross replied. But there's something more important we can do with them. Instead of using the shutdown codes to cripple Imperial technology instantly, Hayes made a decision that would define humanity's approach to warfare. She ordered Ross to broadcast the codes publicly to every species under Imperial control. The transmission went out on every frequency humans could access. Radio waves, quantum channels, and even harmonic vibrations carried the same message to billions of beings throughout the Empire. People of the galaxy, Hayes's voice announced, the Silithian Empire has ruled you with stolen technology. The weapons they use to threaten you, the ships they use to patrol your worlds, the systems they use to monitor your communications, all of these can be turned off with simple commands. The broadcast included detailed instructions on how to access and activate the shutdown codes. Within hours, Imperial weapons stopped working on hundreds of worlds. Occupation forces found their equipment useless as liberated populations took control of their own planets. On the industrial world of Vexnara, human-led forces faced the largest Imperial army still under centralized command. General Zekvar commanded over 1 million soldiers and thousands of vehicles, all determined to crush the rebellion before it spread further. But Commander Rachel White, leading the Human Liberation Fleet, didn't engage Zekvar's army directly. Instead, she broadcast the shutdown codes on frequencies that penetrated the army's own communication systems. Imperial tanks stopped moving. Energy weapons powered down. Transport ships fell from the sky as their engines died. In less than a hour, the Empire's most powerful military force became helpless. Zekvar himself stood in his command bunker, staring at screens that showed nothing but static. His personal weapon, which he had carried for 30 years, wouldn't even turn on. "Sir," his aide reported, voice shaking. "All of our equipment has failed. Our soldiers are requesting orders, but we have no way to communicate with them." White's forces landed near the disabled army, but instead of attacking, they set up medical stations and food distribution centers. Human soldiers, working alongside liberated aliens, provided aid to Imperial troops who had been abandoned by their own command structure. Many Imperial soldiers, seeing enemies treating them better than their own officers ever had, switched sides immediately. The psychological warfare reached its peak when Hayes decided to address Emperor Vexthul directly. Using the Empire's own communication arrays, which human infiltrators now controlled, she appeared uninvited in the Emperor's private chambers on Zalith Prime. Vexthul was meeting with his remaining advisors, trying to understand how his mighty empire had collapsed so quickly. When Hayes's image materialized in the center of the room, the ancient ruler nearly fell from his throne. "Your Majesty," Hayes began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's audio systems, "you laughed when we sought peace. You mocked our capabilities and threatened our families. Now you understand what it means to face a species that views survival as non-negotiable." The Emperor's advisors scrambled to cut the transmission, but found that their control systems no longer responded to their commands. They were prisoners in their own palace, forced to listen as a human general explained their defeat. "Your empire was built on stolen technology and the suffering of others," Hayes continued. "You ruled through fear and intimidation, but you made one critical mistake. You threatened a species that refuses to be afraid." Vexthul tried to speak, but his voice came out as a whisper. "How did you do this? How did primitives destroy an empire that lasted thousands of years?" Hayes smiled, but there was no cruelty in her expression. "We did what humans do best. We adapted. We learned. We found your weaknesses and turned your strengths against you. Most importantly, we gave your subjects something you never could." "What?" the Emperor asked. "Hope," Hayes replied. "Hope for a better future. Hope for freedom. Hope that they could choose their own destiny instead of serving your empire forever." The transmission ended, leaving Vexthol alone with his advisors in a palace that was no longer the center of galactic power. Outside his windows, he could see ships from dozens of different species patrolling the space around Zelith Prime. They weren't conquerors. They were liberators, ensuring that the planet's population could decide their own future. Throughout the galaxy, former imperial worlds were establishing new governments. Some chose democracy, others preferred councils or federations. A few decided to remain independent, but none chose to rebuild the empire. The Zelithian Empire, which had dominated 3 spiral arms for 2 millennia, simply ceased to exist, not because it was conquered, but because its subjects had discovered they didn't need it anymore. Hayes stood on her command ship, watching reports of peaceful transitions on world after world. The war wasn't over yet, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Humanity had kept its promise. 1 year after the war began, General Patricia Hayes stood in the observation deck of a massive space station orbiting the former capital world of Zelith Prime. The station hadn't existed during the Empire's reign. It was built by cooperation between dozens of species that had once been subjects, now working together as equals. The war was over, but not because anyone had surrendered. The Zelithian Empire had simply stopped existing. Former imperial worlds had formed their own governments, created their own alliances, and chosen their own futures. Some became democracies, others formed councils or federations. A few remained independent, but none tried to rebuild the old empire. Hayes watched ships from hundreds of different worlds moving through space around the station. Korathi Crystal vessels flew alongside synthoid mechanical craft and Nethrim gas-filled spheres. They weren't following Imperial patrol routes anymore. They were trading, exploring, and communicating as free beings. President Maria Santos had offered Hayes anything she wanted after the victory: command of Earth's new galactic fleet, governorship of liberated worlds, or retirement with every honor humanity could give. Hayes had surprised everyone by choosing something different. She created the Galactic Defense Initiative, an organization dedicated to preventing any single species from achieving the kind of control the Zelithians once held. The headquarters orbited the former imperial capital, not as conquerors but as guardians, making sure former empire species could develop without interference. Admiral Danny Wright, promoted from his infiltration missions, now commanded rapid response fleets that investigated reports of aggression throughout the region. His ships included volunteers from dozens of species, all united by their experience of liberation and their determination to prevent new empires from rising. General, Wright reported during their daily briefing, "We've received 3 requests for assistance this week. The Korthak system is having disputes over mining rights. The Villani want help establishing a democratic government, and there are reports of piracy in the Outer Rim territories." Hayes nodded, studying the holographic display that showed their area of responsibility. It covered the space that had once been the Empire's core territory, now home to over 300 independent worlds. Send diplomatic teams to Korthak and Villani. Deploy Patrol Group 7 to deal with the pirates. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary. Freedom was harder to maintain than tyranny. Democratic governments needed time to develop. Independent worlds had to learn how to resolve conflicts without imperial arbitrators. Pirates and criminals took advantage of the chaos left behind when the empire collapsed. Dr. Amanda Ross now led the technology sharing initiative from her new laboratory on the station. The nanobiological weapons had been destroyed, but the defensive technologies were freely distributed to any civilization that committed to peaceful coexistence and mutual aid. "We're teaching the Korathi how to build their own quantum communication networks," Ross explained to Hayes during their weekly meeting. "The synthoids are developing new programming that balances collective consciousness with individual rights. Even the Zelithians on their home world are creating new technologies based on cooperation instead of domination." The transformation of the Zelithians themselves had been one of the war's most unexpected outcomes. The nanites that had confused their elder leaders wore off after 6 months, but the experience changed their society forever. Younger Zelithians who had watched their mighty empire collapse began questioning everything their species had believed about strength and superiority. Many Zilithians left their home world to work with other species as equals. They brought their knowledge of imperial technology and administration, helping former subjects build better governments and defense systems. It was a kind of redemption that no one had expected. Captain Lisa Chang commanded the new Interspecies Academy, built where the old Imperial Military Academy had stood. Instead of training officers to maintain an empire, it taught beings from different worlds how to work together for mutual benefit. Our first class graduated last month, Chang reported with pride. Young Karathi, Synthoids, Nethrim, even some Zilithians all trained in cooperation and conflict resolution. They're going back to their worlds as ambassadors and peacekeepers. The Poi Academy had become a symbol of the new galactic order. Students who would have been indoctrinated to serve the empire now learned about democracy, individual rights, and species equality. They formed friendships across racial lines that would have been impossible under imperial rule. Hayes often walked through the academy's corridors, listening to discussions between students from worlds that had been enemies just years before. A young Karathi might debate philosophy with a Synthoid, while a Nethrim cloud drifted nearby, adding its own perspective to the conversation. The most challenging aspect of the post-war period was dealing with former imperial loyalists. Not all Zilithians had accepted their empire's fall. Some military commanders and government officials fled to distant systems, trying to establish new power bases. Colonel Gary Foster led the hunt for these holdouts, but his methods remained true to humanity's approach. Instead of simply destroying enemy forces, he offered them choices. Former Admiral Thekvar, Foster announced to a group of imperial loyalists who had seized control of a mining colony, "You have 3 options. You can surrender and face trial for your crimes. You can fight us and lose everything, or you can help us build something better." Many former Imperials chose the third option. Their knowledge of Empire technology and administration proved valuable in helping liberated worlds establish effective governments. Even former enemies could find redemption in service to the new order. The biggest test came when scouts discovered that the Empire had been just one part of a larger galactic community. Beyond the former Imperial territory lay other star nations, some friendly and some potentially hostile. Hayes convened the first Galactic Council meeting in the station's main assembly hall. Representatives from over 200 worlds gathered to discuss how they would present themselves to these unknown neighbors. "We face the same choice our species faced a year ago," Hayes addressed the assembly. "We can try to build a new empire, using our combined strength to dominate others. Or we can show the galaxy that different species can work together as equals." The vote was unanimous. The new confederation would approach other star nations with offers of trade and cooperation, not demands for submission. They would share technology and knowledge freely. They would defend themselves if attacked, but they would never seek to conquer others. Ambassador Kevin Blake, who had endured the Empire's mockery during that first diplomatic meeting, now led humanity's delegation to establish contact with neighboring civilizations. His experience with the Zilithians had taught him valuable lessons about dealing with alien mindsets. "We represent the Free Worlds Confederation," Blake explained to the first alien ambassadors they encountered. "We're not an empire. We don't seek to rule others or demand tribute. We want to trade, learn, and grow together." Some alien civilizations were suspicious, expecting hidden motives or secret agendas. Others were intrigued by the idea of voluntary cooperation between species. A few were openly hostile, viewing the Confederation as a threat to their own imperial ambitions. But Hayes had prepared for all these possibilities. The Confederation's military, commanded by Admiral Wright, was designed for defense and peacekeeping, not conquest. Their ships were fast and well-armed, but their primary mission was protecting member worlds and trade routes. When the Cardassian Empire, a militaristic civilization from the neighboring Spiral Arm, sent invasion fleets to test the Confederation's resolve, they discovered that the former Imperial territory was no longer defenseless. The Battle of Nexus Station lasted 3 days and ended with the complete withdrawal of Cardassian forces. But instead of pursuing the retreating enemy, Confederation ships stopped at their own borders and sent a diplomatic message. "The Free Worlds Confederation seeks peace with all civilizations," the message stated. "We will defend ourselves when attacked, but we offer friendship to any who choose cooperation over conquest. 2 years after the war ended, Hayes received word that she had been expecting. Earth wanted her to come home. She stood once more in the Pentagon's Deep Space Command Center, but now the room was filled with displays showing hundreds of worlds living in freedom. President Santos and the other world leaders looked older, bearing the weight of governing humanity's role in galactic affairs. "Patricia," President Santos said, using the general's first name as they stood alone after the formal briefing, "you've accomplished something that will be remembered for centuries. You saved our species and freed half the galaxy. What do you want to do now?" Hayes looked at the displays showing ships from dozens of species patrolling trade routes that were safer than they had been in millennia. She thought about the academy where former enemies now learned to work together. She considered the research stations where beings from different worlds collaborated on projects that benefited everyone. "The Empire laughed at us," Hayes said finally. "They thought they knew what humans were capable of. They were wrong about our technology, wrong about our tactics, and wrong about our intentions.